Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 4 of Draft League Retrospective. Today we've got another quarter-final match to go over between Rickabeast, Matt, and Capfoo. So for a quick explanation of the players, Matt hadn't done competitive since 2013, 2014 type times, but decided to give it another go for this draft, his first draft, and he got off to a flying start, winning his first 4 games. And although the second 2 games after that were some slightly embarrassing 6-0s, one that was unlucky, one that was just a wash, he's in the finals and he's got a point to prove after those 2 games. Whereas Capfoo is a phenomenal player. He's won a draft before and he has just been consistently towards the top end of the drafts for years and years now. The teams that we've got today are a Choice Scarf Greninja and a Choice Scarf Tapu Bulu, which has the surprise factor of the dual scarf. We've got a fully physically defensive Stealth Rock Flip Turn Swampert, an Assault Vest Alolan Muck, a fully physically defensive Gigalith as well to set the sand for the Dracozolt, which is Life Orb mixed with Fire Blast as well as Bolt Beak. On Matt's side, we've got a Dragon Dance Charizard X. We have big Choice Banded Ferrothorn, Substitute Toxic Aegislash, Flyinium Z with Fly Landorus, Focus Sash Nasty Plot Alakazam, and a specially defensive Rotom. And for the threats and things to look out for on each side, just looking at the team preview, Cap has got a few different ways you can go about winning this game. So the Choice Scarf Greninja just needs a few things a bit chipped down to pretty much just win with Dark Pulse. And the Dracozolt as well is looking really threatening with only the Landorus really able to switch in, which doesn't have any recovery. And defensively, Capfoo has a few win conditions in that Alolan Muck is quite difficult for Matt to break. And if the Landorus and the Charizard X go down, then that could prove to be a big problem, with the Ferrothorn potentially his best chance at breaking through it being just outspared and fire punched. On Matt's side, he's maybe a bit more limited in his ways to win, in that of the offensive mons, the Landorus is threatening when it comes in on things that it outspeeds, but it's going to just die to that Greninja, and the Choice Scarf Tapu Bulu, the Dracozolt in the sand, all these things are going to threaten it to the point that we're not going to see a sweep from it. The Alakazam is never winning because the Assault Vest Muck, it cannot break. The Greninja is going to outspeed it and get a free U-turn on it every time. And the Tapu Bulu can also come in, outspeed and kill it with a Scarf, leaving the only real way for Matt to directly win being that Mega Charizard X. And Cap knows that, he's prepared for it, which is why we've got a fully physically defensive Swampert and a fully physically defensive Gigalith. So for Matt, could be a bit of an uphill battle. He's going to need to clear out or weaken that Swampert and Gigalith before setting up to win. And the presence of the Choice Scarf Greninja, which is going to outspeed him, even at +1, means that he needs either 2 Dragon Dances, which is going to be very hard pressed to get against Cap, or 1 Dragon Dance while maintaining enough HP that he can survive a hit from the Greninja. So with that, we're going to get straight into the game. And leading off, we've got a Ferrothorn against a Swampert. Leads which, for both sides, do make sense, because with Swampert, you want to get your rocks up, which are really good against a team with a Charizard on it, especially a Charizard that threatens you as much as this one. Whereas the Ferrothorn just has a good matchup against a lot of the kind of defensive get-up hazardsy type leads, which will be the Gigalith, also getting the sand for the Dracozolt, or the Swampert, as we see leading off. So Cap goes hard into the Gigalith, which, against your usual kind of passive hazard setting type of Ferrothorn, isn't going to be that threatened if Matt does go straight for the grass move, but is more likely expecting the spikes or the stealth rocks to come out. But Matt shows his choice band, and kaboom. There goes 94% on the Gigalith. There goes 94% on one of your two Mega Charizard X answers, and suddenly, turn 1, advantage Matt, the Charizard is opened up. Incredible turn for him. So following up from this, the Gigalith gets its leftovers, and then Cap is going to go hard Dracozolt, whereas Matt is going to bring in the Aegislash. Now, I'm not a huge fan of the Aegislash switch, just because there's not really anything stopping you from power whipping again. The Aegislash is potentially expecting a superpower coming out of the Gigalith, but as we've seen from the damage, that is a fully physically defensive Gigalith. You would take the superpower, the Gigalith kills itself on the iron barbs of your ferrothorn, and that's a good trade for you. That's good because, firstly, again, answer to your Charizard down. Secondly, because then Cap can't get any more sand up, and that's fantastic for you because it means the Dracozolt was only threatening you for a few more turns. And of the things that Cap could go into, it's just good for you to get a Power Whip on any of them. The Power Whip plus Sand on the Muck is fantastic chip on a thing that threatens to just wall you. This Dracozolt would have taken a lot off a Power Whip. The Tapu Bulu would set up the grassy terrain, which would make your Power Whip even more powerful. But as is, we see the Dracozolt in on the Aegislash. And it's going to go straight for the Fire Blast, not doing too much damage because the Aegislash is still in its defensive form, and it's going to take a Shadow Ball to the face right back. And from Cap, I can see why you'd be a bit kind of reckless with your Dracozolt's health, because with the Gigalith that weakened immediately, you're probably not going to be getting the sand up consistently through the whole game safely. And so it makes sense from that to kind of go, okay, while I've got my Gigalith alive, while I have this Dracozolt, let's maximize the value from it, but we don't need to be too careful with the HP because we don't have to use it as the win con. So we then see the Muck come in on the Charizard. And the Muck makes a lot of sense because you've seen it's a Shadow Ball Aegislash, it's a special variant that it isn't really going to threaten you very much, whilst the Charizard is a bit risky because if he just Bolt Beaks, then you pretty much have already lost the game. But a Bolt Beak is unlikely in that realistically you're either Fire Blasting again, because if he goes for the King's Shield, then you won't have your attack lowered by it, or you just are switching into something that gets the Aegislash. And this puts Matt in a really strong position because the Muck is too valuable to be risked and left in for its ability to wall the Aegislash and the Alakazam. And so you have to switch probably into the Swampert at this point that is the main answer to you, meaning that you just get some free damage on that Swampert. Except as the Swampert comes in, we see the Mega Evolution and we see the Dragon Dance. I don't like this Dragon Dance at all, which is because it doesn't get you anything regardless of what Cap goes for. Because if he leaves in the Muck, then you don't kill it and you take damage and you potentially get poisoned. Not good for you. And if he goes into the Swampert, then you just have to switch out because you're still not killing it. So it doesn't really achieve you anything. And a Dragon Claw here would have put you in a much better position to come back in a bit later on. Also important to note is that it's good that he manages to get the Charizard Mega Evolve, because once the rocks go up, you're only taking 25 instead of 50% now because you lose that flying typing, instead becoming a dragon. Matt goes into the Landorus here, which is a bit risky, but he does dodge the Earthquake. And I think this does kind of work, just because if you're Cap, you cannot afford to dick about, because that's a Charizard that already has a Dragon Dance up. If you do overpredict, if you do go for the Stealth Rock, the Flip Turn, whatever else, then allowing the Charizard another Dragon Dance could just lose you the game on the spot, and Cap is too good of a player to just lose the game on the spot, turn 6, to something like that. So he goes for the Earthquake that he has to go for, and the Landorus is then able to go for the U-turn, bringing in the Ferrothorn, which is maybe a bit unnecessary from Matt in case of something like a Flip Turn or the Ice Beam that the Swampert reveals here on his Landorus, but it does get the Ferrothorn in a bit more safely. The Earthquake that the Ferrothorn otherwise would have taken would do a bit more. And now, big choice-banded Ferrothorn is back, ready to smack something else. And Cap, at this point, he just kind of goes, well, I've got the Stealth Rocks up. The Charizard already a bit weakened. I'm never going to give it a chance to get 2 Dragon Dances. After the rocks, my Greninja is close to killing it already. I don't need the Swampert as badly anymore. It doesn't really do anything against anybody else. And so he's going to just get up his Stealth Rocks, but then not die to the very free Power Whip as Matt goes for the knockoff. And I'm not a fan of this knockoff either, which is just because anything that would switch into a knockoff is taking more from a Power Whip anyway. So you go for the knockoff because you're expecting Cap to go into something that takes the Power Whip, but the things that take the Power Whip are just taking more from a Power Whip than they would from a knockoff anyway. So knockoff, I don't think really gets you anywhere in this situation. And if just going for the Power Whip here, it gets you 6-5 up, or it lets you put a big dent in something else. But now Cap knows from the damage on its Gigalith that it's choice banded, and so you're suddenly, where you should have just got a kill, you've completely lost the momentum as you are the one that is forced to switch out now. So we see the Rotom come in, which, like, sure, dodge an Earthquake, whatever, and you're able to get the Swampert burned, which is very good for your Charizard, actually, as between the lack of recovery and the burn, the Swampert's getting even more worn down, although it should have just been dead because you should have just Power Whipped. But the Gigalith is going to come in here just kind of as a sack to get the sand up and give the Dracozolt one more hurrah with which to just try and inflict as much damage on Matt's team as possible to help facilitate that Greninja win. And with that, the Gigalith is going to just go down to a Hydro Pump, which is fine. And now in comes big bad Dracozolt once again. And now we've got 3 turns of Sandstorm to do as much to Matt's team as possible. The Rotom just stays in here, and Cap goes for the Bolt Beak, and the Rotom just fucking dies because Dracozolt is ridiculous. I don't agree with leaving the Rotom in here as the sack, because with the Rotom down, look at how much this opens up Greninja. That Rotom was pretty much the only switch in to a Dark Pulse, and with it gone, that Greninja is even more difficult to deal with than it already was. And I think that for Matt, you probably just expect the Rotom to live because Rotom is pretty physically bulky, even especially defensive one. But this is why you calc things, and I think the sack there was probably the Aegislash because it just isn't really doing too much else while that Muck continues to be alive. But with that, it's 5-5, and Matt is able to bring something else back in. In this case, the Alakazam, which would just be outsped and died, but it is a Focus Sash variant of Alakazam, so here he's going, bring me down to my Sash, let me kill you, sure, I'm okay with that trade. And in comes the Muck on the Dazzling Gleam, taking 15 plus Sand. Muck is ridiculous. But Matt is now going to go hard into the Charizard X, which I think here is where it all begins to fall apart for Matt. I think that after the Power Whip, he was immediately at a big advantage, and Cap has now been slowly clawing it back to an even game. But with this, we kind of shift to a huge advantage for Cap. As the Charizard takes the rocks, it takes a knockoff, and it gets poisoned by the Poison Touch. And the problem that we're looking at here is that the Charizard should be looking great because the Gigalith is dead, the Swampert has been knocked off and burnt and can just be muscled through at this point and can't really threaten you because the Earthquake isn't doing very much while it's burnt. Your Charizard is looking great, but you've just let it take a bunch of damage and get poisoned, and between the rocks and the poison, you're never going to be able to roost back up. And even if you did want to roost back up, that would just give Cap too many turns to take advantage of at this point. And The reasoning, I see why Matt did this, because you're not going to die when you go into it, and then you're outspeeding the muck, and you're threatening it out, and you're potentially forcing progress. But I think Matt maybe here didn't consider just how important the Charizard X is to his chances of winning, and as well as that, how difficult it is to get the HP back for it. And I think in that scenario, if you want to do that, you need to be going Landorus, which has the same effect of outspeed, threaten out the muck, but with a Mon that isn't as directly important to you winning the entire game. But be that as it may, now it's in, and hard Swampert on the Flare Blitz. And the Swampert at this point is fine because Cap recognizes you've given me that damage and let the Charizard get poisoned. The Swampert exists, so I don't lose to the Charizard. I'm already not losing it, so I can just go hard into it here. Flare Blitz, and it's down to 2. And at this point, Matt just sees, well, I'm going to die. I may as well just get the maximum value out of my Charizard. And Dragon Clawing and killing the Swampert, once you've already made the previous mistake, is then the right play, but still doesn't change that going hard Charizard on the muck, I think, really squandered the advantage that he'd been building. So we've now got a double down and a 4v4, but not as even of a game as that would suggest, just because Matt is going to really struggle to deal with this Greninja, especially, although Matt doesn't know this, because the Greninja is carrying the Hidden Power Fire for that Ferrothorn. But at this point, on the double down, going into Greninja for Cap is very, very free, because it outspeeds and hits absolutely everything. And so from Matt's perspective, the best you can really do is try and get it to lock itself into a move that won't threaten something and that somebody else can come in on. So for example, you could go Ferrothorn, then hard Landorus on the HP Fire. But what you definitely don't want to be doing is going into something that gives the Greninja a free U-turn, because at that point, that's damage for Cap and he gets the initiative to go into something that he wants, which is why the Alakazam on the Greninja just isn't good, because Cap can just U-turn, and if the Alakazam stays in, then the muck is really free, and if he switches, then Cap just gets the initiative. So we see the switch into the Ferrothorn as the Gren goes for its U-turn, and then in comes the Dracozolt, ready to fire off another Fire Blast and just get a bit more use out of it for Cap before it kills itself to its life orb or dies. And so we see a hard Landorus on that, which is fine, that does work, it absorbs the Fire Blast. And then at this point, Cap just elects to sacrifice his Dracozolt, which is a good play because he sees at this point that the Dracozolt has done as much as it's going to do, its sand is gone, and the only real way that you're getting any use out of it at this point is to get it in on the Ferrothorn. And that's probably not happening again, and he's done that already, and it isn't needed for him to win at this point. And so then, now Matt's 4-3 up, but it's still not really an advantage as that would suggest. And we're going to see why, as out comes the Tapu Bulu. And it reveals itself to be Choice Scarf, killing the Landorus with a Wood Hammer. Now this is maybe a bit easier to say in retrospect than it is to notice at the time. But I think with your already dwindling chances at winning this game, you can't be risking your Landorus like this, because that's the only way that you're breaking past the muck. And I think at that point, something like scouting out the Scarf by going into Ferrothorn is probably what's needed. But even if you do that, then it would still be a very difficult game for Matt to salvage. And I think by this point, you probably require a throw from Cap to do anything really. But whatever the case, down goes the Landorus, which with its Flyinium Z would have been able to just kill the Tapu Bulu if it stayed in, which is why Matt stayed in and went for that kill. But it's shown itself to be Scarf, so the Ferrothorn can very freely come in on the quad-resisted Wood Hammer, which Cap just goes for again because the Tapu Bulu also isn't necessary for him to win, because at this point a bit more damage on the ferrothorn, and the Greninja can just win, or the Muck can come in and fire punch and then just not die to anything that Matt has left. And Matt is going to go for the explosion on his banded ferrothorn, which is going to kill the Tapu Bulu, but for similar reasons to why I didn't like the knockoff earlier, I don't like this explosion, because the things that are hit by explosion are still being hit by your dual stabs, by your gyro ball, by your power whip. That's still smacking them. The explosion is just unnecessary. And by electing to kill your ferrothorn, you're left with the Alakazam and the Aegislash, which is a combo that loses to Greninja and loses to Muck. Never mind loses to Greninja and Muck. So at that point, it's another double down, and Cap just very safely sends out his Muck, which he knows is just not dying at this point. The Alakazam can try and go for a nasty plot, but it's not going to matter, as it can get finished off with a Shadow Sneak. And then Matt just has to go into his Aegislash, and he can prolong a little bit with some King's Shielding, with some substituting, but in the end, it's not quite going to matter, as Cap's Muck is able to just bring it home, allowing Cap to advance to the semi-finals, where he will meet me in what was generally agreed to be one of, if not the best game of the draft, and which I will soon be covering on the channel once I've done the remaining quarterfinals. So with that, that's the game. And I think the takeaway from that game really is just the importance of identifying your win conditions, which Cap did very well and played towards an endgame of either winning with the Greninja or eliminating all of the threats to his Muck. Whereas Matt, I think, didn't perhaps realize the paramount importance of his Charizard, and so was a bit too reckless with its HP and allowing the risk of it getting poisoned. And as a result of that, Cap was able to just do what he needed to do to win the game. So thanks very much for watching, and hopefully there'll be a new video up soon with the remaining quarterfinals. And with that, see you soon. Goodbye.